everyone, it's your good friend Wendy, and you're listening to the Reaching Out with Reach podcast. This is the show that brings you discussions and topics surrounding our community, prevention, and recovery. Today joining us, we have Reach's own Heidi and her friend Erin. Take it away, ladies.
Hello, it's Heidi here. I work at Reach Council as a youth prevention specialist. I'm joined today with my best friend, who is a mental health professional. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Erin Gaddis. I am a licensed professional counselor associate, so LPC associate, and I work with a private practice in the Ellis County area called Elledge Counseling Associates, and I see clients 16 and up for a variety of issues. I specialize in EMDR, so I work with a lot of trauma and things like that.
Thank you, Erin. Thanks for being here today and doing this podcast with me. I'm very excited to talk to you about all of your infinite wisdom. Today I wanted to discuss the subject of the 3 B's, which we all know refers to boundaries, burnout, and balance. Obviously, I don't believe everybody knows that because I made it up, though I'm sure somebody has said it before me, probably someone much smarter. But besides the point, back to boundaries, burnout, and balance. This is obviously a very large topic. And it can be broken down and discussed in a lot of different ways and many different segments. But today we're just planning on focusing kind of on the bigger picture and talking about some practical ideas that we may implement into our daily lives to have a better work and home boundaries to prevent burnout. Obviously, that will lead to a more balanced life. So I know, obviously, you deal with this with your clients a lot of times because without boundaries, it's easy to become burnt out. And if we're burnt out, then we don't have a very good balanced life. Do you have any practical ways or how you help with your clients or anything that you can share on that point?
Yeah, so first, I think these 3 things are super important. I think most people that come to counseling, no matter what the main issues are, everybody needs help with this, whether you're in counseling or not, I think. So this is a big topic that I tend to focus on with most people that I see. Because like you said, like having healthy boundaries helps decrease burnout, helps you have more balance, so it helps you feel a little bit more in control of your life and a little less dysregulated. One of the main things that I use in kind of teaching about boundaries is comes from the book called Boundaries by Dr. Cloud and Townsend. And it's a really popular book on boundaries, but they kind of explain it well on thinking of your boundaries as like a property line. And this is a pretty popular way to describe it, but if you think of a property line, maybe like a fence around your house, that could kind of be how you picture your boundaries. So you get to decide and make the decisions and do whatever you want within your property line, but you don't have a say on somebody else's property line. So it kind of helps you have a visual for like where your stuff, boundaries can kind of be described as where your stuff ends and where somebody else's begin. So everything within your property line is within your power and control to fix, change, decide what you want to do with it, and the stuff outside of it is outside of it. And so we will feel a lot more in control if we're spending the time focusing on the stuff inside our boundaries and not what is actually outside of us. So that's kind of
that one's
the gist of how to describe it.
Because it can be easier said than done, obviously, to create a boundary, especially if you're dealing with other people who don't have boundaries. Mm-hmm. So having that line, knowing where yours ends and where theirs begins, and what belongs to you and not to anybody else, can help that when others don't have good boundaries as well.
Yeah, and that's really hard because we can't control what other people do or say, so they're not always going to like or respect our boundaries. And it's hard to imagine having healthy boundaries when you might be around unhealthy people. So yeah, that part's really hard, like to practically put it in place and start to recognize like that even if someone else doesn't have healthy boundaries, you still can, and you can try to start to implement those for yourself.
I know it's hard to start implementing boundaries, even from personal experience, because if people are used to you not having boundaries and then all of a sudden you put up boundaries, it almost puts like a wall between you, or it feels like that. So how would you say, or how would you encourage somebody to start using boundaries? And what would you say after they feel like maybe some backlash from putting up boundaries in their life?
Well, I think it has to start with with whoever it is that's trying to implement boundaries. They've got to be ready for that, and they kind of have to understand that it's your choice. Me or anyone else can't decide that for you. And one of the things you have to take into consideration are the consequences for setting up boundaries. So they can be good things, but when we do that, it's going to cause, consequences to happen afterwards, which means the people, like you said, who have been benefiting from maybe our lack of boundaries are probably not going to like when we set up new boundaries. So you kind of have to decide for yourself if you're ready for that, and then what maybe a first step would look like. So it doesn't mean all of a sudden you have these huge walls around your property line and everybody is shut out necessarily. You get to decide what is a small step towards the right direction, or things like that. And so initially kind of knowing what your limits are, knowing what your values are, being really aware of your emotions and when you're feeling triggered by people maybe overstepping a boundary, because sometimes we're not aware that that's why we're feeling upset. We don't even notice that it's because people are crossing a boundary. So getting more self-awareness is really helpful.
Well, let me actually talk about self-awareness for you. So we talk about obviously setting those boundaries and knowing where your walls are, or your values, or what you're going to put up. But it makes it almost seem like the first step would to be to look inside yourself, do some introspection, see what you do value, know your emotions. So I think sometimes even a practical way would just start asking yourself questions.
Yeah.
Is this something that I'm willing to compromise on? Is this helping somebody else? And it might be, but doesn't mean it's helping me. Which,
yeah.
I mean, that's how boundaries, you begin to build them, I guess, is learning what you will stand for and what you're willing to be a little bit more flexible with.
Yeah, and sometimes it is also, like you mentioned, burnout earlier. Sometimes we start to notice signs of burnout, which leads us to the realization that maybe we need to have different boundaries. So it's not always boundaries don't always come first. Typically, something happens to cause us to notice that we need better boundaries, whether that is we're growing in self-awareness, or all of a sudden we're super tired and we're getting really burnt out, whatever that looks like for each individual person. I think it also has to do with understanding those signs for yourself too.
I definitely get more easily agitated because I feel I use up my limit, and so my emotions seem to be tied to my lack of boundaries as well.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a stress response too, because when we are feeling burnt out, we have such a limited capacity to be able to continue doing things at our normal level of performance. So catching those signs and noticing what those are for ourselves are super important in order to help us see where we might need to have more boundaries or just different boundaries with things. And a lot of times that's not just with people and relationships, it's also with our time and our energy and maybe even finances and stuff like that impacts our daily life too.
Yeah, I see a part where I definitely think we all could use boundaries more in our life. And especially, we talked about personal relationships. But even in the workplace, even when you're working and doing things, I love to help people. I love to be able to volunteer and just do what I can to help. I feel needed and wanted when I can do something for somebody else. But sometimes I don't realize that I'm not even focusing on any of my own needs. And I will start to become frustrated, or I will start to feel so exhausted and tired, and I feel I don't have a lot of time outside of that. And that's because I didn't incorporate the boundaries that I've started in my personal life and my work life. And for me to have a good balance in life, I need to take that everywhere I go. And that's not that somebody is trying to use me. I'm the one volunteering. I'm the one who let those boundaries just go by the wayside and not implement them in every aspect of my life.
Right.
And I can, and I know that starts also with knowing what can I do, and what am I willing to give, because that's really ultimately it. You only have so much to give.
Right. And each person, like, you get to choose how you spend your time and what you want to do with it. And so that's kind of part of what I was saying earlier of, like, before you're setting boundaries, you're trying to understand those things too, because if you want to continue doing it that way, that's your choice, but you have to understand there's going to be probably consequences with that, to where you might feel more burnt out or stressed or tired. And so I think that's where the balance comes in that you mentioned earlier. The balance maybe is, I mean, you could say multiple things, but it makes me think of, like, balancing, just for example, for work. You want to try to balance that with self-care, time for the things that you enjoy, being able to have a break from some of the things that are stressors in our life, so that you feel a little bit more like you have the capacity to keep doing the stuff that you want to do.
Yeah, I actually find that a little bit ironic, because talking with a few people, and even some of the students that I teach, some self-care things become another thing that's draining, because it becomes a part of our checklist. Oh, we must do this. And what I find important for myself, and hopefully to teach others as well, is that just because it can be self-care sometimes doesn't mean it's always self-care. And that sometimes our boundaries need to change depending on the situation, because there are times we need to put some more boundaries just because we have less to give.
Yeah.
And that's okay to change.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
okay to change our self-care, or, make sure we're getting those, especially as we're entering in a time of, like, holiday preparedness. It's almost Christmas. It's getting quite close, and there's so much stuff going on. So because of family and the extra prep, or maybe even travel, that might mean we have less to give in other places.
Right. And so, like, what you're doing to find that balance also needs to change sometimes. So I think that's kind of what you were getting at, is, like, sometimes your self-care is going to look different than other times based on what you need. So a lot of times as I'm working with people, it's not so much focused on the things that you would normally think of when you think self-care, but it's more about evaluating for yourself, what do I need right now? And maybe what I need is a nap, or maybe I haven't eaten a meal today, so I need to eat a meal. Maybe I haven't had any water yet. Stuff like that, and, like, literally just getting in touch with what are those basic needs that you might have been neglecting is already taking a big step in creating some more of that balance, and then hopefully helping you find ways to continue doing that, which can help you create, time boundaries or relationship boundaries and stuff like that. So it's really about evaluating your needs, knowing your limits and your emotions and all those things to kind of get started.
Yeah, I think having boundaries ultimately makes us more, obviously balanced, but it makes us be able to get more out of life as well, because we're able to enjoy the pieces of life that we are able to participate in, because we have enough energy, we have enough to give in those situations. We better our relationships, we better our experiences, because we feel healthier as individuals when we have those boundaries, and that avoids burnout. And I feel like burnout and boundaries are something that we need to be consistently vigilant in, because they do change.
Yeah.
And our lives do change, and stress is a normal part of life. Things are continually happening and going on.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to recognize, and I guess to validate that, like, anytime you're getting started in changing up your boundaries, or maybe you're noticing signs of burnout, and something needs to change, but it's really scary to make that change, especially if you've been living with your boundaries the way that they've been for so long, and maybe you're needing to add some additional boundaries. That's really hard at the beginning, because sometimes when we've been used to that for so long, it feels really wrong to say no to things, or it feels, we feel guilty for that, or we feel like we've always got to be doing stuff and continue to perform at the level we have been. But like you said, like, in having boundaries and being able to take good care of yourself, you're actually more prepared to be able to do those things to the fullest capacity. So it's really, even though it is scary to get started, It's also necessary in order for what you want to do to continue to be sustainable long term.
Yeah, there's a lot of reason why this has been on my mind lately, but I think it's because I realized that my boundaries do have to change, and maybe something that served me well in the past is no longer serving me well. Mm-hmm. And so for me to be successful in life, by my own definition, not others, is to know that I have enough energy to give to what I want to give to. Mm-hmm. And I think the practical steps of like being able to evaluate and ask myself and stopping and thinking, what do I need now?
Yeah.
Is really so helpful, because there are so many times where I can't really think past right now, and I don't have to. Mm-hmm. I can think of practical ways. So I think right now in this season, and also probably anytime in the future, if I can just think, what do I need right now? Just being able to stop and think about that, then I can determine even to create further boundaries and then avoid that burnout, because I'm taking care of those needs, and then hopefully have a more balanced life. Obviously, that's something I think we all work towards. It's not something that happens right away.
Right, absolutely. And as we're growing and changing and our life situations change, like you said, it's something that we'll kind of constantly have to be coming back to and evaluating and being intentional about.
Well, Erin, I think that's about all the time we have for today. I'm so thankful to be able to talk to you about this. I know it's so important to emphasize some of these things that sometimes we just put on the back burner. Mm-hmm. We definitely keep in mind when we are thinking about it, or going to a conference, or going to a new training, or somebody mentions it, but just something that we need to be very intentional about in our daily lives as well. So thank you so much for sharing your ideas and your wisdom.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, have a great one, and thank you all for listening today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Man, boundaries are really important. This has really made me want to do some self-reflection. I hope it's done the same for you. Well, that about wraps up our episode. As always, if you're wondering how you can help, you can join our coalition meetings. You can also support our youth and family programs with a tax-deductible donation or food gift cards. And if you have any questions, you can email us at info@reachcouncil.org. That's info@reachcouncil.org. Or you can follow us at Reach Council on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening to our show. Stay tuned for ongoing monthly podcasts from our Reach teams on all things prevention and recovery. So remember, life is full of choices, so choose happy and choose healthy. Bye.